Hello, hello, hello. So you caught me in the middle of trying to get this going. And give me just a second. Here it is. Here it is. So, as you guys know, you're watching this because we have Picture Day today. And this is for everybody. So, even the guys who are getting their pictures taken today are going to come back and do this. But I'm going to ask the students who are not getting their pictures taken today to do this. And sometimes when I'm teaching, I think to myself, like I call it the one thing rule, right? So sometimes we set big goals. Like today, I want to do the American Revolution. Well, today's Friday and it's picture day, and half of you aren't going to really have a full class. So I have a one thing rule. There's just one thing I want you to get out of this class, and it's kind of a big one. So it's this idea of it's called salutary neglect or benign neglect. So I'm going to go over it with you very, very quickly, and I'm going to have you do a few things on Ed Puzzle. So if you are watching this now, you are on Ed Puzzle, and maybe you've used Ed Puzzle with other teachers. I really like Ed Puzzle, and I use it throughout the year. So I wanted to try it out with you guys just to make sure everybody was comfortable with it. So before I give you full long Ed Puzzles, I thought we'd do a quick, short little Ed Puzzle. So having said that, let me try to make this quick and short. So when we look at things like the free trade argument, free trade is a big issue throughout American history. Donald Trump has talked about different trade deals with China. The United States, one of the more controversial things during the last election was the North American Free Trade Agreement. So this idea of free trade is an issue today. And as you guys know, I think history is about today. So we're going to be talking about things like mercantilism and things like benign neglect today. And that reminds me a lot of free trade. So with that in mind, what are the benefits of free trade and what are the drawbacks of free trade? So go ahead. You're going to see a question in just a second, but go ahead and answer that question before we move on. All right. So what does this have to do with history and what's on the AP exam, right? Which is what we worry about a lot. Or what's on the Regents exam, which we worry about. So with that in mind, when we talk about modern issues of free trade, they actually have a lot to do with mercantilism. So when we talk about modern issues of free trade, we might say things like, well, free trade costs Americans jobs because places like China and Mexico, they can make goods for far less money. They pay their workers far less money, and therefore American businesses can't compete. So it can cost Americans jobs. That's probably true. On the other side of it, the goods that we're buying are probably less expensive. So Americans who maybe have transitioned in the economy, maybe they're now in tech or you name it, they've transitioned into the economy. They're no longer a part of manufacturing, are now getting more for their money. So there are benefits and there are drawbacks and there are winners and there are losers. So it's a complicated issue and it has a little bit of historical precedent. So when we look at history and we talk about mercantilism, which is something you guys probably learned about in world history. So I'm going to do this quick. This is going to be a quick one today. We talk about how colonies provided raw materials and markets for the mother country, that we see a transfer of wealth from the colonies to the mother country. We also talk about free trade. We also see limited trading opportunities for the colonies. The colonies have to trade with the mother country, for example. What's sometimes not talked about, much like free trade, which, by the way, what do I always say? I don't care what you think, but it's a complicated issue. There's two sides to it. What's often not talked about with mercantilism is the benefits that the colonies got from it. So yeah, there's drawbacks to it, but there's also benefits because the colonies have these ready established markets that they know that their raw goods, tobacco, cotton, right? Their raw goods are going to be purchased. But having said all that, one of the most important things, this is called benign or salutary neglect. And this is going to be it. We're going to wrap it up right here because, like I said, I got the one thing rule today. I just want you to know one thing. So there's this mercantilism going on. It's got drawbacks and it has benefits, but the drawbacks of it are in need of enforcement. So you can only trade with England. Okay, I could only trade with England. And I'm only allowed to go 55 on the Palisades. And, insert a host of other laws and regulations that people sometimes don't follow. Not me. I'm always doing 55 on the Palisades. But you know what I mean. So even though there are these restrictions, and we talk about these restrictions, the restrictions needed to be enforced. And oftentimes they weren't. So when we talk about neglect, and I think when you hear neglect in the news, sadly, you might hear a story of child neglect. Like it seems to me, if you hear neglect, that word in the news, that's the unfortunate story that's being covered. And it's usually about some poor little child who's being neglected and maybe left outside and was picked up and a very sad situation. But I don't want you to think about neglect in that way. I want you to think more of like the child neglect that occurs when you're 17 and mom and dad go away for the weekend. And you're probably, if you're like most 17-year-olds that I know, you're probably not like, oh no, my parents are neglecting me this weekend. You're probably like, oh yeah, my parents are neglecting me this weekend. I'm half joking, really, but you know what I mean. You probably are happy for the freedom. You're probably happy to get a little bit of break. And who knows, maybe not in these times, but maybe in years past, you'd even call up a few friends and be like, party at my house. So what is the benefits of salutary neglect? I feel like salutary neglect sounds negative, but to the colonists, the benefits of salutary neglect was essentially, and let's see if I can go back real quick, they get all the positives of mercantilism with very little of the negatives because they are still able to work around the restrictions. They're still able to trade with France. They're still able to trade with Spain. This idea of salutary neglect is going to have a huge impact on the American Revolution. So when the American Revolution comes, in large part, certainly a major role is going to be England's abandonment of salutary neglect. So I got a one thing rule today. I think that's got to be less than 10 minutes for you, and just a question or two to experiment with that puzzle. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and go Sherman Sharks, and I'll see you on Monday.